Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Vaibhav Bhandari. I'm a program manager for Microsoft Health Solutions Group. I work on developer experience of Microsoft HealthVault and dabble a little bit with medical ontologies and terminologies. I'm going to talk about programming across healthcare silos. In the next 20 minutes, I might not have time to get questions, so please feel free to tweet them. I'll try and get to these questions later. Healthcare is an interesting arena with a lot of challenges, a ton of standards, some of which work, some of which don't. We'll try to cover a little bit of that. We'll try to touch upon open solutions which enable working in this environment, and I'll try to outline a few opportunities which you as developers and particularly as open source developers can contribute to solve this difficult problem. There are silos of health information in the healthcare ecosystem. Some of your information lives with a health plan, some of it lives with your physician, a lot of it is with your hospital, some with your employer, some with your pharmacy, more with your devices, and various consumer services like WebMD. In these different silos of information, there is communication gap. Your information is fragmented across all different islands of data. Let's even drill into one particular case, the hospital. For a typical 400-bed hospital, there are about 100 individual systems running in that hospital. There is a different EMR system, there is different medication administration system, there is a yet another procedure documentation system, so on and so forth. There are silos of information on the floor of an hospital. Not only that, there are silos of information behind the scenes. There is a system which manages claims, there is a system which manages transcriptions, a system which does scheduling, so on and so forth. So you get the idea, the data is fragmented all over the place, and the systems don't talk to each other that well. Just quick raise of hands, how many of you guys are familiar with how internet works, what HTTP is, TCP/IP is, SMTP is? Pretty much most of the room. What about meaningful use, ICD-9 to ICD-10 translation, SNOMED CT, HL7, IHE, master patient index, EMR, EHR, so on and so forth. So the healthcare standards are less familiar to people, but the internet technologies are very, very familiar to a normal developer. I'm going to try and explain in next 10 minutes a simple scenario by which, using first principles, a developer or a company willing to move the data from different clinical silos to a consumer can do that by first principles. I'm going to take a case of Open Health Incorporated, which had just implemented an emergency EMR for a clinic. And to do that, I'm introducing Jim. Jim's a typical happy guy. He had a lot of beer and hot dogs. Unfortunately, that gave him pretty bad gastric problems, and he ended up in an ER. So 10% of ER visits come from gastric problems. Jim's one of them. So in Jim's case, the nurse takes his vitals, gets him salinated, and there are a couple of lab tests which need to be done for Jim. So the EMR, which is working with Jim, actually sends a message to the lab system. As you see this message, it looks highly unfamiliar to people who are very familiar with internet. Well, it predates internet. This is an HL7 message which goes from the emergency EMR to the lab. It has a header. It has information about that patient, in this case Jim Smith, details of his visit, and a lab test which is ordered for Jim. So once this message is sent to the lab processes it, does its thing, and sends back an equivalent message with the result. And in this particular case, you see that Jim does not have any gallbladder tissue. One thing to note here is in this particular message, gallbladder was given a code T57000 and if you see S&M, it's a way for systems to communicate standard terms in an established vocabulary called as SNOMED CT. So gallbladder is defined as T57000 in SNOMED. And just incidentally, the number 88304 happens to be a CPT code for a microscopic exam. CPT is yet another terminology which enables systems to understand the details of what exactly they mean. If you look at this message, it looks very much like EDI. It's pipe delimited. Well, the standards body which developed it, HL7, recognizes that and has moved to a new standard, version 3, which is very XML based, but the adoption for that has not been there yet. Anyways, what do you do with these sort of messages? How would an EMR work with them? To enable that, there are few open libraries out there. Particularly, I would like to mention the Happy library, which is used by Mirth and other projects, which enables you to process, parse, and create HL7 messages and also annotate them with appropriate vocabularies. In this case, it's in Java. You import this library. You can do a bunch of processing with it. I won't go into details of the code here. You get the idea. Now Jim's happy, but I'm not sure if the hospital's happy because they have not been yet paid for Jim's visit. So for that particular reason, the emergency EMR sends a message to a health plan with yet another standard, which in this case happens to be X12, similar to HL7. It predates internet. You will see instead of the pipes, there are stars. And in this particular case, the EMR sends a 270 message from the emergency clinic for Jim Smith asking the health plan if Jim is eligible for this particular visit. Well, the health plan comes back to the EMR and tells with the message 271 for the emergency clinic that Jim Smith has a goal plan. So Jim's been paid for, he's taken care of by his health plan. Well, he's happy and ready to go home. But before he goes home, he needs a discharge summary of what happened to Jim at this particular visit. And that is possible today with various technologies and products available like Microsoft HealthVault, Google Health, Dossier, where the EMR can send the discharge summary document to one of these personally controlled health record systems, which then can give that data to the individual consumer or patient. In this case, I'm going to drill a little bit deeper into Microsoft HealthVault. So the EMR puts together a CCR for Jim's visit, and the CCR is a standard which is XML based, detailing the description of what care was delivered to Jim in that particular visit. In this case, various vital signs for Jim's were performed, some lab orders were done. All that information can be packaged in a very structured format in a CCR and can be sent to HealthVault. Yet another format is CCD, which instead of having a structured ordered node view of the world on XML has an indirection to certain codes and templates and has been established as a standard for meaningful use through a restriction on CCD called as C32. So either of these documents the EMR can create using open schemas, using some of the tools out there, and send them to HealthVault. So how would the EMR do this? HealthVault has several open community-supported Java libraries. I'll mention some others later in the presentation, but in this case, it can create a password-protected package for the CCR or CCD for Jim's particular visit and package it using very simple code. Standards for password-protected packages have been established by IETF. HealthVault uses a similar standard. And this particular package can move to Jim, so to Jim's HealthVault record. So once the package is moved, Jim gets an email saying, hey, log into this particular page and put an ID by which he can receive that particular CCR into his HealthVault account. In this particular scenario, you see, once Jim puts his ID, which was given to him by this physician, he receives the CCR in his record. And the whole care loop from EMR to the lab to payment processing and eventually in hand of consumer is possible using these set of standards and open libraries available. But just to give you a glimpse of what is available or what is going to be in the future, this whole interaction is being worked on to enable developers and folks with a lot of IT knowledge but less of healthcare knowledge to send the care records to a person simply using SMTP. Microsoft has been highly involved with the NHIN Direct project. We have been contributing code and actively participating in an implementation where you can simply integrate with a personally controlled health record by having a SMTP as MIME agent sending email to, in this case, an email address at healthvault.com. So the whole process of sending the code to Jim and the Jim going into a login page and entering that code just goes away. So we are really excited about this. There is great opportunity for developers here to connect clinical silos to personally controlled health records. Not only can you send your lab results and vital signs, but through Microsoft HealthVault, you can even send medical imaging and large files. For if Jim happened to have a CT scan done for his gastric problem, the HealthVault application for that particular case could send a large file to HealthVault using medical imaging features in HealthVault. So this is a recently added feature. It enables individual patients to look at their radiology reports, X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, so on and so forth. To even whet your appetite further, HealthVault enables client and mobile applications by first-class authentication mechanisms on Windows clients and various mobile clients like Windows Phone and Android, iPhone are in works. But you can actually develop client applications which securely talk to this service. More details of this are on the bit.ly link I have here on the slide. As I want to make a quick note here that as the data moves from the clinical silo into HealthVault, it moves through a whole lot of privacy and security hassles into a consumer domain. It is no longer under HIPAA 5010. As soon as Jim receives the information in CCR or CCD format, it is in the consumer domain, which in future would be regulated by FDA in one way or other. But it's a very, very critical demarcation for developers and application vendors to understand that the information is moving from clinical silo to the consumer silo. I showed you various ways you can develop integration in a clinical silo using first principles using open libraries, but Microsoft has a platform called as Amalga, which also enables you to do that. And my colleague here, Teddy, is going to talk about connected health framework and various tools which enable developers to integrate various hospital systems in a common UI for enabling data transfer from these systems to the consumer silos. Here's a list of HealthVault open source resources. I don't think Fred is in the audience here, but we have a community promise which enables and guarantees that the service can be replicated by anyone without IP restrictions. So in case HealthVault goes out of business, anyone can pick it up from the spec and develop their own version of it, as long as it's implemented in the full. We have open source SDKs for Java, Ruby, Python, PHP on respective sites from CodeFlex to SourceForge. I would love if you guys want to be part of the community and contribute to any of these libraries. The .NET SDK for this particular platform is also under reference license. Here are some resources which you could use to know a little bit more about the connected health platform, and Terry will talk a little more about it in a while. I just want to stress on the fact that there is a lot of opportunity to bridge the silos of the clinical domain and empower the consumer with open technologies. As some of my fellow speakers mentioned through last couple of days, there is about $39 billion in stake here, which each of you guys with a great expertise in IT could enter into the healthcare domain and bridge that gap and get and have value to the end consumer. So with that, I would take some questions. I think I have 3 minutes. Thank you.
I work for an independent physicians organization. We integrate with a lot of labs and hospital systems. And although it's HL7 all the way, what's in the HL7, it might be a CPT, it might be a SNOMED, like proprietary code for the lab results, things like that. So while the HL7 structure is fixed, the system is very incredibly off what they send within that structure.
It's funny that you mentioned as long as you get working within your enterprise, it's a standard. But as soon as you want to move the data out of your enterprise and talk with someone else, it's not a standard.
Well, you right? Everybody was using API, but we have to crosswalk all the providers because they use internal hospital IDs or who knows what.
Yeah, it's so that's why the standards exist, but the interoperability is a challenge. And with CCD or C32, hopefully at least the discharge summaries will become more standardized as the formats and the vocabularies which go into them have been made much stringent. So I think everyone recognizes that problem.
So right now, it looks like we're making great progress towards getting the information out of the hospitals and labs and into the consumer domain. Have you guys been talking with EMRs much about pushing it back to them? So when I go from, I move and I go to a new hospital, and I say I have a chronic condition, I go to the doctor a lot. Is there any way to push some of those, my old medical records, my old imaging files, to the new hospital?
Yes. So it is a two-way street. So EMRs, if the consumer allows them access to the records, can access all information from a patient's record. One of also the key distinctions between HealthVault and a lot of other systems is we do have granular information. We support all the standards like CCR and CCD, but we have granular data types, if you will, for medications, conditions, so on and so forth. So the data which you are pulling in from the system is highly structured, and if it did end up from a good source, chances are the consuming EMR will have a pretty good history and a structured data for all those medications and conditions it's looking for.
Can you talk about how HealthVault's working with the new state HIEs that are coming about?
So the question is, can I comment on how HealthVault is working with HIE? So we want to enable all the HIEs to have a very easy way to put data into HealthVault and get data out of HealthVault. Through the Microsoft Amalga product, we have a HealthVault connector which the HIEs can choose to use, which enables them to have a very fast go-to-market for moving the data into a personally controlled health record. Sweet. Good. I would also like to mention that I'm trying to put together a simple summary for a web developer how to navigate the healthcare IT. And if you are interested to review it or give me some feedback, feel free to go on the bit.ly link. Thank you very much.